One.
Hi everyone, my name's Harriet Gaffney and I'm Portal's Artistic Director. I'll be assisting behind the scenes this morning, monitoring the technology and your questions. So I just want to give you a few bit of housekeeping information. You've been automatically muted upon entry. So this isn't because we don't like you or we don't want to hear you, but it's because we are in regional Victoria and there's some connection issues. So please remain muted and keep your camera off for the duration to ensure that we all have the best connection possible. And this will also limit distractions for everyone, including our guests today. If you do experience any tech difficulties or get thrown out of the session due to a bad connection, please click on the Zoom link that you were sent last night to join the conversation, and it will bring you back in if your connection allows it. If your technical problems do, however, remain unresolved, we are recording this session and it will be made available via the Surf Coast Shire YouTube channel and the surfcoastartstrail.com.au website as soon as we've edited out bits like this housekeeping info. Lastly, if I can get you all please to give us a short hello using the chat function. That's the speech bubble icon at the bottom of your screen. We'll make sure that everyone can hear and see us properly before we begin. If you're on a mobile watching this, this is located via the 3 dots button at the bottom of your device. More and more, I begin to feel like an air hostess. Okay, I should be waving my arms around for you. Towards the end of the session, we're going to open the discussion up for questions. So please, if you've got any questions, if there's any burning issues you want to ask about, etc., jot those questions down. Use the chat function to type them in, and both myself and Connor, who we have behind the scenes with us this morning, will collate those questions and we'll read them out at the end of the session to our guests so that they can ponder them. Thanks everyone again, and welcome to Mentorship and Collaboration. Okay, so now that we're moving beyond the housekeeping, everyone, welcome to Portal and the final of our Women in Conversation series, Mentorship and Collaboration with Miranda Jarvis and Iris Walshe-Howling. I'm Harriet Gaffney. As I said, I'm the Artistic Director of Portal, and I'm also the Arts Development Officer for the Surf Coast Shire. Portal is being brought to you live from the traditional lands of the Wadawurrung and Eastern Maar peoples of the Kulin Nations. We acknowledge the Wadawurrung, Gadibalnud and Gulidjan as the traditional owners and protectors of this place, the first creators on country, and interestingly, I would suggest, all people for whom mentorship and collaboration is an integral feature of everyday life. We acknowledge their ancestors who cared for the land, rivers and sea, and all things living for thousands of generations, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and future. In the background, you'll be hearing our guests, Miranda Jarvis and Iris Walshe-Howling. This series of Sunday morning sessions focuses on the intimate space of the conversation. We reached out a few months ago to various women throughout the Shire who we thought were really had a really great view and vision about the Shire's arts and cultures life, some of whom are well known and some emerging, and all of them, in our opinion, fascinating. Our first guest and the interviewer for today's session is emerging artist and cultural producer Miranda Jarvis. Miranda is a multimedia artist based in the Otways who uses a variety of media to explore ideas around the environment, identity and place. Alongside her own creative practice, Miranda is the inaugural coordinator for SPARK, the Deans Marsh Sport and Art Coalition, that was one of 13 recipients from 180 applications to receive a $75,000 Creative Places grant from Creative Victoria late last year. Miranda is also one of Portal's inaugural local area coordinators for the Hinterland region, a role she has quietly shone in with her absolutely can-do attitude, her attention to detail, her wisdom that's well beyond her years, and her agility in these increasingly strange times. Miranda's guest this morning is another woman whose work has influenced the performing arts in Melbourne and beyond for more than 50 years, Iris Walshe-Howling. Iris has been active in the Melbourne independent theatre scene as an actor and director since the late 60s. She was a member of the infamous La Mama Theatre Company, which morphed into the Pram Factory. These were heady days for Australian theatre, and Iris remained heavily involved with fringe theatre within various iconic Melbourne venues for more than 30 years, alongside teaching theatre studies, drama and art, before moving to the Surf Coast in 2001. Iris began working with the Anglesey Players in 2003, when the company was almost on the verge of collapse. Iris was brought in to direct John Romerill's play, Mrs. Thowley F. Responses from local Surf Coast audiences and reviewers were incredible. They hadn't seen anything like it before. The issues of women's position within the social and family structure of the day were cleverly interwoven into the text, and Iris made the most of putting the emphasis onto those burning questions. Word of mouth gave the troupe full houses by the second week, developing a core audience who have supported all of the group's ventures since under the name Anglesey Performing Arts. And we'll be talking more about those groups in our session on Sunday, the 16th of August, with playwright Janet Brown in conversation with various key players from the theatre world. Before I get out of the way, however, I just want to encourage everyone again watching to express your thoughts about the session via the chat function. We'll be collating this feedback, and I really will be looking at it as I look towards the future arts and cultural programming at Council. So it's a very good way for you to let us know what you want more of, what you want to learn about, etc. Again, we'll also be inviting questions from the audience at the end of the session. So if you have any questions for either of our presenters today, please note them down and get ready to type it into the chat function when we call on you. Thank you both so much. And Miranda, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Harriet.
I'm going to get out of the way.
Oh, okay. All right, so firstly, before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which Iris and I both live, the Guttabinwood people. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. So this conversation today about mentorship and collaboration comes from my belief that both are deeply important in the arts. I'm very much an emerging artist, and I found that thus far both mentorship and collaboration have been huge sources of support, inspiration and advice for me. So Iris, I'd really like to start off by asking you about your beginning in the arts. What made you want to work in theatre, and are there any particular mentors that you can remember from the emerging stages of your career?
Hi, Miranda, and hi, everyone. Yeah, I suppose my interest in the arts was from when I was a very small child. I was born in a small village in Italy, and my aunt, who was at that stage my mentor when I was at the age of 4, who was an artist, used to bring all the children from the village to her house and dress them up, and then we'd kind of parade around the town and do various activities, plays and things like that. But also being in one of those tiny little villages as a child is something that sticks in your mind. I came to Australia at the age of 6, but prior to that I was surrounded by ritual and quite heavy sort of imagery in terms of, you know, churches and the various rituals that go on in those small towns. So I was constantly bombarded by that performance element, and we used to take part in that as well as children. So it was something that sort of gained my interest straight away as a child. I was totally fascinated by it when we came to Australia. And I started school at the age of 6. Once again, I was totally sort of involved in anything that was going on that had a performance element to it, and I was constantly sort of writing little plays and performing them with my friends throughout school. And then in terms of mentorship, I was so lucky because I ended up at Brighton High School where Peter Oyston was the drama teacher. Drama at that stage didn't exist as a subject as such, but he used to hold after-school rehearsals, and we'd put on a drama production every year. And he was the most amazing drama teacher for his time. He ended up being head of VCA, I think.
Okay.
But what he did was ignite a passion in a lot of people in the school at that time. And it's really interesting because there were quite a few people who've come through that school that were influenced by him in so many ways. And they ended up being playwrights and filmmakers and actors. So it was really, you know, a pivotal point in my life in terms of getting the kind of feedback that I needed to create that passion in me for theatre. What I loved about it was the fact that it had that element of bringing us together and people working on the one project and, you know, going through a process which was just as important, if not more so, than the final result, which for me has been something that's stayed with me for the rest of my life. So then as I got older, I was doing bits and pieces, and after I left school, I ended up being involved with the La Mama company. It was, once again, a really amazing sort of process. I ended up there in '69. It had been going maybe for a year, and they held an open rehearsal, and I ended up there. And all the people who were in that company were mentors for me. They were people with ideas, people with knowledge. We were holding all sorts of workshops at the time, influenced by what was happening in America. And we were also going through the Vietnam War. And so one of the things that happened at that time was that there was a lot of street theatre that was involved during that period. And that first photograph, which shows, I've got a little me there next to my face, but it was us performing on the streets during Vietnam. So yeah, I just think you can't be in the arts really without having mentors, because you're constantly surrounded by ideas and by people who influence you in so many ways.
And that teacher that you had in high school, he's obviously left quite a legacy with, you know, the work that he did with all of you and your fellow theatre makers. So
it was fantastic. He was introducing us to film as well during that time. So we'd have afternoon sessions where we were looking at avant-garde films right through, you know, so it was fantastic. The other thing that happened when I was at La Mama was that Betty Birstall was still around during those days, which was pretty incredible. For those of you who don't know La Mama at all, it's a tiny little space. Used to be a shirt factory, and it was taken over by Betty Birstall, who'd been to New York and had seen a similar setup, which was the La Mama New York, and she decided that she'd come to Melbourne and set something up herself. So the first people who were drawn to that particular area were, you know, the university students and stuff from Melbourne Uni, because it's very close to there. And they, you know, they brought absolute sort of life to the place, and their main concern was to try and create an Australian theatre, because prior to that, as you would all know, a lot of the stuff that was coming through Melbourne was imported from overseas, and their concern was that they wanted the Australian voice in theatre, because it's so important, you know, that we actually look at our own stories and bring them forward so that we can kind of identify our cultural base that we're sort of coming from. So that was happening. So it was an extraordinary sort of period in time. This particular image that you're looking at the moment, just in terms of theatre and a lot of the arts, that poster for Farmyard, which is really says a play by Franz Xavier Kreutz for La Mama. It was a play that never happened. We were ready to do it. We'd been waiting to get the rights from Kreutz, and we eventually got through to him in Germany to ask for permission, and he didn't give it to us. So the whole thing sort of fell through, which was pretty amazing. But just to give you an idea of what often happens with a lot of, you know, professional art, is that you put a lot of work into it and then something might happen and it doesn't go ahead, as we're experiencing at the moment with the COVID
for sure.
stuff. So many of us have got projects. In terms of mentors, there's an image there of Caspar, and that was put on by Lindsay Smith. And once again, it was one of those pivotal moments working with Lindsay. He was there initially at La Mama when I first joined La Mama, and he was one of the crew that was, you know, a big voice at the time. And he came back from living in the States, in New York, and was working heavily with the APG at that time, and very much a mentor as well. He was one of those people who was just vibrant and passionate about the arts, and he didn't give a damn about anything. Whatever, you know, whatever the vision was the important thing. And so quite often he would, you know, he would come into contact with stuff that wasn't very well received from the authorities, and, you know, would often come in some sort of conflict with them. But his ideas were extraordinary, and he had an immense influence on me as well. I also worked with, prior to coming to Lawn 19 years ago, I also worked for 7 years with a company called Crow's Bar Cabaret, who was headed by a friend of mine, Ella Filar, who's an amazing cabaret writer and performer. She writes the texts, she writes the music and performs the music. She'll often perform in stuff as well. And a lot of her plays ended up also at La Mama and the various other venues that were around Melbourne at the time, like Budinsky's and Dante's and various other places. What else can I say? That's possibly about it. Other bits and pieces. This theme will continue to come through the conversation, because everything that we're talking about in terms of mentorship and in terms of collaboration is actually housed within theatre. You can't have theatre without those things. Because the mentorship comes not only through, you know, if you're a director, maybe within that terms you become a sort of mentor, but you've also got your actors who become mentors for you. Because it's a two-way process, which is quite different, I think, to, you know, to your visual arts, which is changing, but quite often visual arts is a very solitary sort of activity. It's now starting to sort of spread out a bit from that, I think. But, you know, they're the two dominant things that we just come across every single time. You can't put on a piece of theatre without some form of collaboration. Well, I suppose it can happen, but with some form of collaboration or some impact from outside. Yeah.
Well, talking about visual arts, I'll go into my first two images. The photo on the left of the two canvases were made at Platform Youth Arts, formerly known as the Courthouse Youth Arts. And the second image here is a painting that I did for an exhibition in 2018. So I started off probably, in more of a solitary practice. I left home after year 12 and I got accepted into a Bachelor of Creative Arts down at Deakin Uni. It was good for me because at the time they weren't taking portfolios. I wasn't too sure what I wanted to do, so I just applied and got in. If they had have been taking portfolios, I'm not sure that I would have. But I decided to soldier on in my practice and pretty soon got involved with Platform Youth Arts. It was pretty special for me because when I was a kid, my mum was one of the founding members of the group that was able to utilise the old courthouse building for youth arts. So it was really great to be able to go there as a young woman and I guess make my own mark on the narrative of that space. At that stage, around 18, 19, I'm not the most confident person now, but back then I had a really hard time putting myself out there and I guess putting my hand up to get involved. So for me, it's really important that spaces like Platform exist because it means that people, rather than working in a studio at home on your own, not being exposed to different ideas, you can jump in and be involved in different projects. Amber Smith, who's the curator at Platform, if you've had anything to do with Platform or the courthouse as it was in the past 4 or 5 years, you will have met Amber. She's been both a mentor and a friend to me. And these two paintings on the left here, we made these for a group exhibition together called Co. And they're actually old drop sheets that were used when they were repainting the gallery space. So I don't know how many exhibitions those paintings have actually seen before they became canvases. And on the right, the painting there is called Love. And that formed a series, or was part of a series titled Finding My Feet, which was at Platform back in 2018. So I just finished my graduate year at uni and was feeling a little bit low and depleted after expending so much creative energy. That series of works were really personal to me, and I think it's important for visual artists because you're putting so much energy and time into your work and it's not always appreciated what you do. A lot of the time you do it for the love of it because you're never guaranteed to get paid for it. So I think for me, because I've had many great mentors who weren't necessarily formal mentors, they were just people willing to support me or, chat through ideas with me. I feel like, I guess the way that I look up to these people, I think it's a pretty huge honour to have someone looking up to you. And I want to be somebody that people can look up to or at least, share that space with. On these next slides are some more collaborative works. So on the left is a mural that I painted in the laneway at Platform. I was just given a blank wall to do whatever I wanted to do on. And I painted over that maybe 10 or so times. I just couldn't get it right. But, I'd go up there on a sunny day and there'd be Amber and other crew working and just to be given a space to make work was pretty fantastic. And also having people stopping in and wanting to see what you were doing and being able to share your practice with people is quite special. On the left is a work in progress shot from the Laneway mural project, which saw a group of 5 or 6 emerging artists partner up with school or community groups in Geelong to develop a mural that sat in the courtyard at Laneway. At Platform, sorry. I had some really great opportunities to work with young people doing workshops, and to me that was great because I remember being a kid and being super shy and not knowing how to put myself out there, and there was kids in some of these sessions who were super shy and didn't know how to put themselves out there. So to kind of connect with them and to speak with them in a way that I wish I had have been spoken to as a child, and then watch them come out of their shell was really special. I think it's important to engage others in your creative process if you can, to help bring those ideas to life. And Iris, on that, you've mentioned it, but theatre is a naturally collaborative medium. How do you bring a vision to life, and what goes into making a piece of theatre?
Each project is something new, and I think that's a really important thing. There's so many ways to bring an idea to life. For me, in terms of theatre, it's got to be something that absolutely speaks to me, and I've been really adamant, particularly after I left school, I left teaching, that the only thing that I'd be involved in is stuff that actually is very important to me. And there are so many issues at the moment where I think we as a society need to sort of think about. The images that have just come up are from a play that we did. I think it started in 2017, 2018, which was a play by Janet Brown, who's a local and well-known Melbourne and I think by now Australian playwright. Mm-hmm. We're so lucky to have her on the Surf Coast, and a lot of her work has actually started on the Surf Coast and then taken elsewhere, which is what we did with this. Janet approached me about a project that she was really interested in working on, which had to do with mental health. Mm-hmm. And she'd actually been spoken to and commissioned to write this play. And the idea that she had was that she would like to make it as personal as possible. So what she wanted to do was bring together a piece of theatre which actually had people who are living with problems with mental health had their voice in it. So what she wanted to do was to go, she made a decision that she would go around and interview 7 people, mm-hmm. and then put together from the interviews, a verbatim piece of theatre. Wow. Which has become quite popular again. It was around, earlier in the 60s and 70s, but then it kind of disappeared for a while here. But it has become quite popular just from the point of view that what happens is that you use the people's own voice and whatever it is that they say. She had hours of interviews with these people, and she then took all this and collated it into this piece of theatre, which ended up being a really incredible work for us to work on. when we got the script, Janet had some ideas about how she wanted to perform, but she said to me, look, here it is. I've written in some, some directions, etc. But Iris, I trust you. You do what you want with it. And when I read the piece, what immediately sort of came to mind for me, and usually this is the way I work. I'm reading a piece of theatre and suddenly it's imagery. I'm very much a visual thinker. And so I just had, for some reason, I had this image of these huge portraits of each of the characters that were being played out. And I wanted them to be the set, basically.
Yeah.
And I also thought of having each individual person just on a square sort of block to do their storytelling. And so from there, we started to think about how do we make this happen? And so I got in touch with Rebecca Hosking, who's a brilliant photographer on the Surf Coast, and asked her whether she'd like to be involved. And of course, she was into it right from the get-go. And handing her that, once you've got a creative on board to do something, it was a matter of sort of having the conversation, the discussion, and then handing it over to her to come up with ideas. And she came up with this beautiful idea about having the portraits, but then superimposing onto the portraits imagery that came from the text. And this is what I love about sort of, working with people who aren't particularly connected with theatre either, when they get involved with it and want to go to the length that she did with it, because she read that script, I don't know how many times, to gain those ideas together. And it was such an exciting process to watch this come through, to see each portrait as it came about, which was fantastic. The other thing we did was that Janet, when she asked the same questions to every interviewee. And the last question she asked them was the notion of what was it that what was a piece of music that they listened to when they were in a state where they weren't handling things, I suppose is the best way to put it. So each person had nominated a piece of music. That was their music. So then we started looking also for someone who could take on the music. And I was incredibly lucky. The first time round, what we did was we involved choirs from all over the Shire and asked them whether they wanted to perform in this play. And we had a couple of people who took that on to bring this about. And so we had people from everywhere, and so they became part of the performance. The same time as I was working on the play, they were working on the songs, which was fantastic. And we had recorded music for some of that so that they could sing to the music. And that was terrific, because at the end was a way of involving the community, which was good. But it went beyond that, because for the opening of Mental Health Week, we performed the piece, and the choir performed. But it just so happened that the CEO from Sane Australia happened to come to see it. He was in Anglesea, and he heard of my name probably through my son Damien, whom he'd met, and he thought, I'll go and see what this is about. The beautiful thing was that he said to me later that when he was sitting there, he thought, oh, I see what they're doing. They've actually used the people who they've interviewed. So these are the real people, and they've put them out there as actors,
Yeah.
And that was the most fantastic feedback, because once I read this material, to me, the important thing and the thing that we all work towards was the notion that there's no superimposed character onto this. Everything is in the text. This is word verbatim coming from people's mouths.
Yeah.
So we had to maintain respect for the words that these people are sort of putting out there. And it was the thing that drove the whole play to make it as naturalistic as possible to in terms of performance, to just make it a conversation with the audience rather than a performance as such. Speak to the audience, be really aware of what the audience was there for and what we were saying to them from the mouths of these 7 people. And that worked really, really well, because once Jack saw the play, his thing was, look, you know, this has got to go to Melbourne. It's got to go to it's got to go to Sydney, to the Opera House, was his, you know, this was the sort of going joke as we were doing it.
Yeah.
But certainly they were prepared to back us in Melbourne. And so he put the organisation behind us to perform it in Melbourne. So that was one way of sort of collaborating both with the, you know, with the Surf Coast choirs, and with, say, in Australia. In the meantime, I'd sent the script to La Mama and they'd approved it for the summer season. So when those 3 things came together, the 3 of us collaborating on that, with La Mama doing all the stuff that they do, which is terrific. They give you the space for nothing. They give you money towards promoting the show. They give you all their people on board, you know. It's just fantastic. So we started to work towards sort of getting it to La Mama. We then, when that was out, we sold out even before we started, which was amazing. Like the 2-week season sold out. It also sold out in Anglesea, which is where we performed it first. Not only did it sell out, but they were the hugest audience we'd had for anything. People were just streaming in every night. It was amazing. The other amazing thing that happened was that we had people staying back after each show, sometimes for an hour and a half, wanting to talk to you about them and how they related to the information that was coming out from that. It was just fantastic. And that happened every time we performed it. After it had been to La Mama, I was approached by Women with Disability Barwon Health, and asked whether we would consider putting it on for Mental Health Week in Geelong for the following, the following year. Or it was the same year, actually, because it was the year before we'd done it at Anglesea. And so that was 3 seasons, which was fantastic, you know. Yeah. The thing that really sort of, and once again, the notion of collaboration, you know, came through again. It was Jackie Pearce, who's probably well known in the disability sector, who approached me about performing it for women with disability as their annual sort of arts venture that they do, which was really amazing. The courthouse came on board, the Geelong courthouse came on board for this, and they were fantastic. We performed it there. It was just wonderful. We got a really great deal to perform there for them, and we were also involved in the White Night, the first White Night event in Geelong. So that was part of it during that week, which was terrific. The only other thing that sort of comes to mind was that, you know, once you're dealing with issues like this, that sense of responsibility that you've got to have.
Yes.
towards the people who are doing this. It obviously came through Janet's work in compiling this piece, in writing this piece of theatre. She was so on board with where these people were at.
Yeah.
And it was beholden on us as actors and as a director to make sure that we did it justice.
Yeah.
You know, you can't take on people's work and muck around with it.
Right.
By the same token, I'm a theatre director, and for me there was a kind of balancing act between the realism that was projected from the actors and the stories that they told, and theatre as a form. And I wanted to somehow express the theatrical element in the place. And it was a real tussle for a while trying to work something out so that what I was presenting had some essence of theatricality as well as the total realism of these stories. And there's a kind of balance that comes through. And eventually I decided on actually working those two elements, but having a separation at some point. So basically what we did was, the other collaboration we had here was working with Lyndall from, she's a dancer from the Loft dance studio. She came in and checked out the movement at one stage, and we cooperated with her in another project as well. She's a fabulous person. You probably know her.
I haven't met her, but I've heard of the Loft.
Yeah, she's fantastic. Anyway, she came in and sort of, you know, worked with that on one session. But just separating that notion or how to present some kind of theatricality into it, into the, you know, the vision. And so we did a physical piece of theatre to introduce the notion of mental illness, and that was done very, very theatrically, with slow motion, with lighting, with sound, which came both from recorded sound and from voice. And as that sort of moved towards the front of the stage, it kind of, there was a kind of clicking into the naturalism of the piece, where each person eventually sat right at the front of the stage, eyeballing the audience and speaking directly to the audience on their various podiums. And quite often as a director, you really have to pick up a piece of theatre, and you know, there's a lot of you never really quite know where you're going. You've got this, and I think it's the same with all the arts, you've got this great big picture of what you want, and then you end up with what you get, in a way. So and that has to do a lot with, you know, what space you've got. You know, if you had an actual theatre space, you could possibly do more with your vision, but you've always got to make adjustments with what you do.
Work to those parameters.
Yeah, which is really challenging, but it's also fantastic for getting your ideas kind of sorted. And going back to that notion of being a visual person, I often have, when I pick up a piece of text, I often have a visual image in mind, and then everything else kind of slots in. And once I've got a creative team together and we discuss what we're doing, all of that comes into it. And, you know, you end up with the piece you've got. But I think in terms of collaboration for that, it was just such a fantastic opportunity to get like-minded people on board, you know, to have Sane Australia doing all they did for us to get us to this point. Like, they paid for us to go to Melbourne and stay there for the time, you know, that we had. They did all the publicity, they did the opening night, they invited, you know, various people from the mental health organisation. I forgot to say that for this particular piece, we also had 2 fabulous musicians on board. And for the first piece at La Mama, we had Kieran Tobin, and you might know Kieran. He's just a great guitarist and beautiful singer. And then he couldn't do the Geelong run because of other commitments. So my son Damien put me onto a friend of his, Tim Hulsman, who's a Geelong musician, beautiful musician as well. And both of those musos brought so much to the piece, so much. We also had quite a few projections operating for that piece as well. So quite often we'll span across a variety of aspects to bring in to make that final piece. And I think it was a very, in terms of Anglesea performing arts and what we've produced over the years, really was one of the highlights. And to work with the writer is just a brilliant thing. You know, you've got her there. Janet's fabulous. She hands, I've done a few pieces of hers now, and she virtually hands it over to you. It's like once you're on board, she says, okay, that's it. I don't want anything more to do with this till I see it on opening night. And that is such a fabulous gift.
Yeah, that's so much trust as well.
Yeah. But you have that initial stuff with her, which is terrific, and she'll trust you to do anything. I've made a movie with Janet as well. She wanted someone to come up with the concept and you know, write the script and direct it. And same thing, you know, she's on board, like she trusts you, and it's a really fabulous way to actually work with people. I love it. Yeah, Miranda, I know that you've done, you know, some fantastic. You were talking to me before about what you're working on. Similar sorts of things, you know, you would know, and what you spoke about prior with, you know, with working with other people, getting you out of your studio and
definitely.
And because I think a lot of, as I said before, I think a lot of artists do tend to sort of, you know, be in their ghetto, whereas we're getting so much more now.
Well, I'll come back to these slides here, Iris, in a second, but just
sure.
For my own practice, when I first started out, it was really solitary, I suppose. But now these pictures here, they were taken down at Aries with one of my closest friends and partner in art, Helen Demetriou. And we met at uni in our second year. I just got back from traveling. I'd taken a few months off, and everyone I knew at uni had left. They'd graduated. So I was feeling a little bit daunted by coming into this new studio space, not knowing anyone. And I'm working on something, and Helen just popped her head over and started chatting. And from then it was fast friends, and we worked together a lot. So these photos, were taken down at the beach, and Helen came down and visited, and we just took this piece of pink fabric and a camera, and we just mucked around, which is really fun. I think for Helen and I, our process is very intuitive, and I don't know if having fun and playing and making for the sake of making is always valued. So we kind of like to reject the idea that we need an outcome. And And so much of the joy in our making just comes from those processes, which, Iris, I'll just go back one to these fantastic images here. Can you speak to these?
I can. I'd had a bit of stuff to do with wearable art when I was teaching. It was one of the units that I set for a VCE class one year. And once again, that notion of play, Miranda, it's just so fantastic, isn't it? And the other thing is the use of materials that are already there.
Yeah.
So that you're not, particularly in this day and age, it's so important. And so I'd set them, this thing about sort of creating a costume that could be worn. And we were looking at movement basically too, because what happens once you create something is that you've got to be able to move in it too. And usually that structure will determine how you move.
Yes, yes.
So we were just making that kind of link. Anyway, the kids came up with some fabulous stuff. And one of the girls who's now just really blitzing it made this stunning wedding dress out of paper. And this was, it would have been in probably about 88, 89, 1988, 89. It was a while ago. And it was just beautiful. And when I got to the Surf Coast, Julie Dyer had set up the year before I arrived, I think, or maybe even 2 years before I arrived, had set up the wearable art program at Airies Inlet, Artrageous, she called it. So when I got here, it was like, wow, there I go back to that thing that I'd set for my school students, and a wedding dress came to mind. So basically I got a whole lot of cartridge, big rolls of cartridge, and just made this wedding dress and took it to the Wear Outrageous event, and it was really successful. It looked really beautiful. And it was just paper. It happened to be a roll of paper that I had. I used paper, I used a bit of plastic bags, I used some quick tip things, those for cleaning out your ears. There was a lot of that, and basically just paper and a bit of veiling too from the headpiece. So I worked on both the headpiece and it was quite sort of sculptural and fairly sort of stiff. Anyway, so then from that year on, I made wearable art pieces. This particular piece that you see that my friend Genevieve Roberts, who is part of APA, is wearing here, was made just from cellophane bits that I had lying around. It was made from some gutter guard. It's got lots of plastic that I sort of tubed up. It's got lots of plastic bags, all the headpieces and stuff made out of plastic bags. What else has it got? Yeah, bits and pieces. So once again, I tend to work very, very much structurally like a piece of sculpture, I suppose. It's just the way they sort of turn out. And that piece has performed quite a few times. It did the Outrageous. It performed in an event at Kudos here on the Surf Coast, which is the most amazing space on the Surf Coast.
It is, isn't it?
If you haven't been, please go to Kudos. It really is extraordinary. So they had an event there where there were 3 of my pieces and 3 pieces by a friend of mine, and we just wandered around the gallery and into the space basically. It also performed at the opening of the Sculpture by the Sea exhibition in Lorne, which was really terrific. so yeah, that was that one. The other one I think was the last piece I made for wearable art. And what happened, I had something in mind, and I had a fall and a broken ankle or something, so I couldn't get about to do what I wanted to do. So my friend drove me around and picked up a whole lot of leaves and, you know, all over the place.
Yeah.
And the whole piece is made from gum nuts and from leaves. I structured it together with toothpicks and my trusty glue gun, which I use for everything. And so it was all made from natural, you know, flora, really, from around the place. Once again, touching base with, you know, with country, and it's just, you know, in the area where I live, which is right on the edge of the forest, which is just superb. So yeah, they're the two pieces that, and this is my art stuff that comes through. I suppose it comes through in my design work for theatre as well. But all of this stuff it just gets fed into whatever visual or vision you have for something.
Well, and I love the use of the found materials. I think we can often get a little bit caught up and say, well, I don't have blue paint, so I can't paint that. Or, you know, I don't have this, or I don't have that. I can't make today. I'm going to go and do something else. Whereas I like, you know, when you buy like oranges or something, that mesh netting.
Yes.
Collect that. I think that is the most amazing material. I collect it now and I'll sew with it and just add in random little bits that might otherwise be thrown out, or
fabulous.
Just don't look at it twice. But then when you do feed it into your practice, you can
it just becomes so important, doesn't it? I know I've been, you know, over this period of time, been really involved in doing eco printing and using material around me. I mean, what a bounty of
such a bounty
stuff, you know, that we've got, that we can do things with. And that leads, you know, you start with that and do your eco printing, and then some stitching with bits and pieces that you've got lying around, or adding, you know, anything. I mean, we're just so lucky to be where we are. But I suppose wherever you are, you can always find something.
You can, and I think it really, like, I've done a little bit of eco dyeing, not very successfully yet, but I'll get there. But I think once you start learning about that and learning about the different plants and what you can do with them, it just opens up a whole new world, and you get to see where you live differently.
Differently, you're right. And it's so magical, the process. Once again, coming back to what you were saying, I think play is absolutely important, and we use that a lot when we're, you know, in our process, when we're getting a play together. You know, we do play. We have lots of workshops, you know, and we fiddle around with ideas and with movement and with sound and whatever it is that needs. But I think, you know, that notion of the process being really important. Yes, the end thing is lovely. And it is great, you know, it is good to come up with something that you're proud of and you're happy with, and everyone's had the involvement. But that process, and I know that, you know, people in our ensemble, we always have a bit of a joke, you know, where we get to a point where we're kind of pulling our hair out, and you know, and I might be sort of going, and they say, trust in the process. You know, because that's the mantra that I've come in with my theatre work as well.
And oftentimes when you are coming to a brick wall and you can't see through that, you know, you can either walk away for a little bit, come back to it with fresh eyes, but it's kind of how you adapt to those creative blocks, I think, that creates some really interesting outcomes.
I think so too. I think that's so true. And it'll quite often send you off on a tangent for something else, you know, and that's fantastic.
I love it. Now, Iris, we touched on this before, but the arts, well, for me, they've been a way for me to navigate different things in my life, be that mental health issues or just emotions. But I definitely think that the arts have the power to confront some pretty big things. That's obviously been something that's driven your career. That's pretty important to you?
Absolutely. I think, you know, as I said before, I'm at the stage of my life now where I just want to be doing stuff that I want to do. And for me, it's to do with the issues of the day. And, you know, as you say, like the Hope song was about mental health. This particular piece, Madea, it's about woman's place in the world. You know? It's an ancient piece of theatre, ancient Greek piece of theatre. But for me, what was interesting, I'd come across a monologue by an Italian playwright, Franca Rama. She was the partner of Dario Fo, who's also, you know, writing really incredible stuff right up to very recently. And she'd put together this beautiful monologue. And then I'd also read a piece by Jean Arnaud, which was also about Madea. And the notion of this was to sort of compile those three pieces into something that spoke to us today. And, you know, the today element came in, which was very relevant with the Franca Rama piece. The ancient stuff came in from, you know, from the ancient Greek. And so I sat together with Genevieve, who was she's now in Sydney, but she was an integral part of APA. And we spent a whole weekend just compiling and putting together this piece of theatre. I called it the Madea Project because that's what it was. It was a project right from the start. And what was beautiful about being able to put down these three pieces was that it was very clearly looking at women as they've appeared throughout the ages, but very much also in now, right? So where we stand, have things changed, have they not? And the great thing about this was that particularly the Franca Rama piece, what we did with that, it was a monologue, so we cut it into 7 pieces. There were 7 people in the chorus, and it was all women apart from the 2 men, and we gave each woman a piece of that monologue where she took on the role of Madea, which was identified through her cloak. So that cloak was passed around to each of the women, and when the cloak was worn, she became, these are the chorus, particularly in that piece, she became another version of Madea, pretty much. So that Madea is the story of all women in a way. And so that was a really beautiful way of being able to do it. It deals with all kinds of issues, and it was a really interesting research into Madea ends up killing her children. So at the same time, that Farquhar incident was happening in Deans Marsh. And so there was all this material out there you know, in the world about infanticide and about, you know, mothers or parents killing children. So we did a lot of research on that. We're also very lucky to have on board Jess Lakoski, who's a beautiful dancer. She came and joined the the company in a role as an actor, but also to do some choreography, which was really important because we had the chorus choreographed throughout the piece.
Yep.
We got on board Lyndall Quick, who came in, who was working with Jess at the time, and she came in and did a couple of workshops for us as well. One of my signature tunes, I suppose you can say, is the notion of slowing down movement. And so watching what's happening across the stage, and we use that a lot in our choreography. I really wanted that notion of working as one. Yes. One woman, it's the woman that's in all of us. So that happened throughout the piece. And at the same time, the notion of slowing things down. So at every instant during this play, there was movement, but sometimes you couldn't even discern the movement. So, for example, when you've got something in the foreground, like perhaps the chorus doing something or somebody speaking a monologue or whatever it is that was going on, the people in the background were actually moving so slowly that you could hardly recognise that they'd moved. But by the end of that sequence, they were in different positions on the stage.
Yeah, wow.
The other thing we did too was to bring down, not use only the stage, and we do this a lot. We use the space as any possibility. We can work on the back wall, or we can, in the hall, or we can use the stage, or we can seat an audience on the stage and work down below, whatever. We try and sort of, use it in various ways during the performances. So basically, the notion of having these women who became the chorus, who were sort of commenting and responding to what was happening in the foreground, was very, very important in this, and that the issue of women in society was the thing that sort of drove it right from the word go. The other person we brought on board was Kirsten Honey, and you'd know Kirsten, Miranda, I think, from she works with Back to Back a bit now, but she's a beautiful musician.
Okay, yeah.
She's worked with us a lot, and it was the first time that Kirsten had worked with us. We'd seen her at Kudos when we were performing in the Wearable Art. She happened to be doing some singing, so I invited her on board, and she was really pleased to come on board, and she created the music for the piece, and it was just extraordinary. And so you might see in some of the images, she wore this flute on her. No. So she often played the flute, and there was other music that was being played as well. Just really, and she also created songs. And the other thing we did is that we included these amazing songs from text that she actually wrote, and she worked a lot with the chorus, with the group in as a director of music, and so we had song throughout it as well, which was really beautiful. And the other person was Sue Roberts, who's a filmmaker, and she was invited on board to provide film work for it, because what we did was we went to the National Gallery in Victoria, and we had the 7 actors behind the wall, the water wall.
Okay,
in street clothes, and you see that in the image behind the chorus of the 5 women there. You can vaguely see some images of people behind that. That was actually a projected film of those 7 people, because at the beginning of the play, as a prologue, each of the characters came on stage and was dressed into their costume and then took their position up in front of their filmed image on the back of the stage. So that was a way of incorporating the filming that Sue did. But we also had amazing imagery of water and stuff that was projected onto the stage as well for the journey to Greece. And the other thing was that when the woman took on the role of Madea, there was also a projected image of their mouth speaking there, and the sound of the mouth speaking their part of the monologue, just to put focus on the voice and on, you know, giving women a voice. So yeah, all that kind of stuff. When you're thinking about how do you go about doing something, you know, how do you come up with an idea once you've picked up your script or once you've compiled something together? How do you put it on stage where it's going to actually create interest and draw your audience in and make that connection between you and your audience? The other thing I want to mention too is I was really lucky that my sister is very friendly with a couple of beautiful designers, wedding gown designers, haute couture wedding gowns, and I approached them as to whether they had any gowns that we could, you know, that they didn't want, and she sent me down bags full of these amazing haute couture dresses that you can see in those images, which we kind of tore up and distressed. And, you know, did things with. And then, it was a really incredible process, that one, the Madea process. But the other thing that happened with that particular piece is that it morphed as well, because not only did we present it as a 2-week sequence, we also presented it for the One Act Play Festival, where I got a copy of another piece that was done in Sweden somewhere, of Madea, a written text, which was it was so different, it was beautiful, it was really minimalist. And so what we did is we cut it right back, and we presented it for the One Act Play Festival, which has got a time sequence. You can't go over 45 minutes. So we reworked it and we called it Black Madea. And we dressed everyone in black instead of the white. And we hung the wedding dresses as the set from the ceiling.
Oh, wow.
So it had it morphed into something else too. So that's the beauty of sort of working on a piece twice, or, you know, you just come up with other ideas and other bits of text, and it was great. And I think Kirsten's music played more of a role in it as well, and just beautiful working with, you know, a bit more material.
Now, Iris, I've just seen the time, and I think we need to start wrapping things up.
Oh, my goodness,
I know. That went quickly, didn't it?
Quickly, it's amazing.
So there's a few slides that we haven't got to, but I feel like we've definitely had a really fantastic discussion about collaboration and mentorship, and I've learned so much about your work and your life. So thank you very much for your generosity today.
Oh, Miranda, and thank you. That was just a really fabulous chat with you. Lovely to get to know you.
Yeah, you too.
Both of you, I'm going to jump in here and say thank you both. It was just glorious to sort of get an insight into your own individual practices, and also the way that you both draw on, you know, collaborate towards your practice. Iris, you've got me and quite a few other people really excited and longing for the theatre scene that we're not able to see at this time. So it's you've really got our creative juices running. I do have a few questions that have come in, and you know, we've got about sort of 10 to 15 minutes before we'll close up finally. So first question we got, well, what are some tips? And I'll throw this out to both of you because Miranda, you've been really good at going out as a young artist and working with this yourself. So what are some tips for finding mentors in the arts? And, you know, as a secondary part of that, what does an effective mentorship look like? I might start with you, Miranda.
Sure. So I think I mentioned when we were talking before that none of my mentors have been formal mentors, you know, apart from at uni. When I was doing my honours year and I had my supervisor, Sean Loffrey, because that was a research project I was working on, I was paired up with someone. So I guess that was more formal, but I just tried really hard, I guess, to start running in circles that are supportive and are open and are willing to give people a go. You know, people say fake it till you make it, but I really believe in telling people where you're at and that you do need help or you do need assistance. So for me,
that's a fabulous point.
Yeah. And I think you do yourself a bit of a favour by being a bit more authentic about that. You know?
And being honest about the fact that in any way, I think we all find spaces where we're not sure of what the next step is, and being honest about that. And that's that collaboration again, isn't it, Iris? You know?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think I'm pretty much like Miranda too. No formal mentorship, though I do know that they do exist, and they're always put up on various sort of sites, you know. So it really is worth a look. And I think probably, did you do something on mentorship for this or no?
In regards to, look, I really wanted to be able to mentor. So before this became Portal, when it was still the Surf Coast Arts Trail, I really wanted to be able to mentor some young emerging artists / arts workers through this sort of the production side of arts events and things, because I think that ultimately it's really difficult to make a living, you know, from your daily arts practice. And so I think it's really good for creators of any ilk to have that sort of, you know.
And I think it will come in an informal way. In terms of theatre, there's so much theatre going on in the Surf Coast, really, and Greater Geelong. If you see something that you love, approach people. Everyone's really open. You know, the thing about working in the region is that you've got those contacts, you know, it's really good. The difficult thing is tyranny of distance, you know, that term that we use all the time. So, for example, with me, Anglesea is perfect because it's 25 minutes away, etc. I did one show in Geelong, which was just fantastic to do. I just loved it, you know, at the Woodbine Theatre. But it was just so difficult to get there in the middle, you know, at night and come back at 1 o'clock or 12:30 in the middle of winter. It's impossible. So in a way, you know, but if you kind of, if that doesn't bother you, then latch on to something to people that you see and you know. Most people are so open to allowing you, you know, to work with, and they love it. I mean, you know, we involved 2 young kids in the last project we did at Anglesea, which was the blood cries out of the soil. And they were just young guys, one from Anglesea and one from Mary's Inlet. And they were just so rapt, you know, and they really want to do more theatre, and we'll start to think about there are problems involving younger people that you've got to overcome as well, just in terms of, you know, who you can have on board and police checks and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, if anyone older than 18, just go for it, you know, like.
Absolutely.
It means sometimes that you may not get it, you know, something on stage the first year, but we started off with 4 people, 2 of them are still there, and a couple of them have dropped out. They were older and they've dropped out in the meantime. But everybody else, we've just, they've just come on board.
And I think it's that thing too about being willing to go up to an artist or a performer and just say, I loved that and I'm so interested in what you do. Can we talk more about it? Because everyone is flattered to know that someone wants to learn more. So it's
fantastic when you get
don't ever be shy, I would say, of approaching someone whose work, even if you've just got an inkling that you're drawn to them.
Yeah, I when I was doing my honours in 2018, I was working, and I still do, but with a lot of fabric. And I found this artist. She's an American woman who lives in New Orleans, and looking on her website and just felt this total synergy between our practices. And so I just sent her a little email and said, oh my gosh, I love your work, rah, rah, rah. And then I got an email back. Her name is Diane Leroy Evans. Oh, no, sorry, Robin Leroy Evans, I should say. And I got an email back, and she was so kind and open and wanted to talk to me about what I was doing. That was fantastic. I'm here in the Otways and she's in New Orleans, but I was able to make this connection.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So approach people. Don't be scared to see someone's work.
That's the beauty of living in this age, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
That you've got access to people from all over the world. And
Absolutely.
that's where I do most of my research, is just, seeing something I love and going into it and checking out what people are doing. It's just fantastic to be able to see a piece of theatre from somewhere else, of someone that you just think is extraordinary,
Yes.
And all of a sudden there's all this stuff there. And look, you're never inventing the wheel, but being able to be influenced by something you see and then using it for your own purposes in a way that, that just sort of takes it somewhere else and expands it, which is
every
what
single art form does.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Every single art form, it's individual creators who are engaged by something, who are excited by something, and they follow a spread, and then that branches out.
Yeah, that's the way it is. It's fantastic.
We've got so Miranda, if you don't know, Miranda's mum, Lisa, runs the Extraordinary Community Cottage in Deans Marsh, and she says, can we write a play with all the different communities of the Shire contributing? And for me, when I think about COVID and I think about, when we eventually are able to move out of this current situation, that's exactly the sort of thing I think that we're going to need. How do we learn to relate again as communities? And the arts is going to help lead us there, and being able to tell our stories of this time, for now and for the future, I think is going to be incredibly encouraging and will be a really important part of how we recover.
And we do have some fantastic playwrights on board.
Absolutely.
Absolutely fantastic. Sandy Fairthorne is another playwright. There's just, you would have seen some of the plays that were by local companies at the One Act Play Festival last year. There's good stuff on board. You need somebody to actually do the work. And unfortunately, I'm not a writer. I've sort of done a bit of that sort of self-devised stuff, but for me, it's in picking up a piece of text, and going from there. I'm a director or an actor, So
We've talked a bit, like during your conversation, about the importance of spaces like Courthouse, which has now become Platform Arts in Geelong. And I think that we can never underestimate the value of spaces that allow the arts activity to occur. So, which leads me to a really exciting announcement. But many of the people who are listening are probably aware of this, but for those who aren't, Surf Coast Shire Council recently granted access to the old Sport and Rec Centre in Torquay, the large building near the library, for a multi-arts centre, so use by multidisciplinary arts practitioners. That will occur sort of going into the beginning of 2021. The building will be handed over, and then the committee that's been involved for a long time in working out what that sort of space would look like will do some work behind the scenes. So I think that's really exciting. And there is actually another really exciting project that's happening here in the Shire, which is there's been significant funding that the Shire itself has given, also Regional Development Victoria, towards some sound and audio-visual upgrades to the Anglesey Memorial Hall. So when we're out of this period where we can actually freely move and things, we're going to have space for a lot more innovative and exciting projects and collaborations across the Shire. And of course, Miranda, you know, as the coordinator of Spark, reusing all of those beautiful facilities around the Deans Marsh Rec Reserve for arts activities. So people, the spaces are coming, you know, we've got spaces we can come together, we can collaborate. You can reach out to people whose work excites you and ask for mentoring. We don't seem, what have we got? Yes, let's write a grant, Lisa Jarvis says. Good on you, Lisa. I love a person who'll just jump into writing a grant. Maria Fila will help you with that, it seems. So that sounds really exciting to me. I'll just go back to my notes. So look, I do again want to thank you both so much. It, you know, as we're speaking, Iris, it really, you know, it just becomes more and more obvious to me how much locally grown arts activity, particularly in the performing arts, is going to be crucial for helping us to move through this period, you know. So thank you so much for opening up these conversations, both of you. Miranda, for trusting me in saying, okay, I want you to do this. Iris, for being on board. It's a beautiful conversation. I think you two are so well paired. You know, you're exciting, you like to innovate, you know, you'll try anything and you like play and process. So I think it was very beautiful.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Thank you.
Everyone, I will just give you a little bit of a wrap up on what's happening on Portal this week. So again, this afternoon, if you want to get into some weaving with some incredible First Nations weavers, please have a look at the surfcoastartstrail.com.au website and check out what's on this afternoon. We've got the Waiapa Wawatnunda Marangi project. We all come together in a meeting place. So, you know, use some of this sort of COVID anxiety to, you know, bring yourself down and just, you know, focus on the very near. Next week, we're going a little bit bigger though. We've had this month of, you know, these intimate conversations led by women. Next week, we're going to the bigger picture, the past, present and the future. And I'll be in discussion with some extraordinary public artists from the Surf Coast Shire, Rowena Martinich, Glenn Romanis, Julie Shields and Grant Fink. And we're going to talk about public art, what it is and why it matters. Details for all of our events and more can be found, as I said, at the Portal website, www.surfcoastartstrail.com.au. And if you're interested in theatre and the performing arts, do take a look at the program for the weekend of the 15th and 16th of August, because it's all about it. All right, everyone. Thanks again, Iris and Miranda. We love you dearly, and we'll see you all next week. Adios.
Thank you. See you later.